Today we have Majlis and lecture from the Sayyid and the doctor, and right now we're going to have Hajj Marhi is going to be reading Quran for us, so Hajj.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وبشر الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات أن لهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار كلما رزقوا منها من ثمرة رزقا قالوا هذا الذي رزقنا من قبل وأتوا به متشابها ولهم فيها أزواج مطهرة وهم فيها خالدون. إن الله لا يستحي أن يضرب مثلا ما بعوضة فما فوقها فأما الذين آمنوا فيعلمون أنه الحق من ربهم وأما الذين كفروا فيقولون ماذا أراد الله بهذا مثلا يضل به كثيرا ويهدي به كثيرا وما يضل به إلا الفاسقين الذين ينقضون عهد الله من بعد ميثاقه ويقطعون ما أمر الله به أن يوصل ويفسدون في الأرض أولئك هم الخاسرون. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. عطروا أفواهكم بذكر الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.
Shukran Hajj. Next we have Dr. Sayyid Jafar al-Hassani, who's going to be providing a lecture in English. Just a little thing is to listen well, because the information that he provides isn't just knowledge with words, but knowledge with action. So listen well, not only with your ears, but with your hearts, for Imam Hussein especially. Doctor?
رحم الله من أعادها ثانية. ثالثة على حب المولى أبي عبد الله الحسين عليه السلام بأعلى أصواتكم تؤجرون. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Respected sisters, dear brothers, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This night we enter once again the season of mourning and sorrow and tragedy of Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam, of Imam al-Hussein, of his companions and of his family members. A season that for some of us will last 10 days. For some of us will last 40 days. for some of us will last the entirety of the month of Muharram and the entirety of the month of Safar, each depending on their level of commitment to the tragedy of Karbala and to the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. As we enter these holy moments, and they truly are holy moments, we begin by asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us, bring us closer to Him through the remembrance of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. The remembrance of the Imam, which as we delve deeper and deeper into our religion, we discover to be a divine mercy for humankind. The presence, being in the presence of the mention of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, is a source of guidance and a source of bliss in our lives. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we experience this bliss in these days and nights ahead, and that this experience remains with us after these 10 days and nights. Every year, as we enter this season of Ashura and Muharram, we start hearing discussions and questions and debates about everything that has to do with the lectures. What should lecturers be covering? Which themes and which topics? And our communities, are they really benefiting from these gatherings and these lectures and these majalis? Should we continue to have them and invest in them? Should we continue to pour so much time and energy into them? And then what about the lecturers? Are they really providing the type of information and content and so on and so forth that is needed, that is relevant, that is timely? This is a debate that rages on year after year, every time we come closer and we enter into the season of Ashura. The first point is that this is a very valid and legitimate questioning and debate. As communities, we need to aspire. We need to have great expectations. There's nothing wrong with that. From our centers, from our lecturers, from ourselves as communities. We should expect our lecturers to be well prepared, to choose their topics carefully, and to come and deliver them in the most eloquent and the most effective way. We need to think about what we can do as communities around these majalis. The time and effort and energy that we put into them, can it be leveraged and used to create even greater benefit for us, for our children, for our families, for the next generations? These are all legitimate concerns and we should have them. But usually when we come to this debate, the first piece is missing. The most important piece is usually missing. And that has to do with ourselves. What have I done personally to prepare myself and fully benefit from these majalis? Before I think about the community and the centers and the lecturers, what am I doing to prepare myself so that I fully benefit from the majalis of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and Ashura? When we come to these majalis, there's a very big difference between someone who attends these majalis as though they are an invited guest of honor, and their only role is to attend, sit, observe, maybe eat and drink, and provide criticism and feedback, and then disappear until next Muharram. There's a very big difference between someone who does that and someone who comes with a deliberate intent. I'm going to open my mind, I'm going to open my heart, and I'm going to do everything I can to fully benefit from the time that I'm going to be attending these majalis, that I'm going to be in the presence of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. There's a difference between thinking that blessing and guidance is something that happens to us. Guidance and blessing is not something that just happens to you passively. You sit back and it just happens. This is something that you choose for yourself, which means that you have to prepare accordingly. You have to prepare psychologically as you would for anything else, any other task. You prepare yourself psychologically. You prepare yourself spiritually. You prepare yourself physically, so that when you attend, you are fully here. Have something to write down on. You're going to have thoughts. You're going to have decisions perhaps about your whole life. Perhaps there are reflections that you need to go back and meditate on or further research. This cannot be just a passing thought that is wasted at that time. When you attend the majlis, think that Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is there and you are in his presence. Consider this an act of worship. Perform a wudu before you come. Have an intent, a niyyah, just like you would when you're about to enter fasting or prayer or hajj. There are ways that we can prepare ourselves. And once we do this, I assure you that regardless of the quality of the lecturer, and regardless of the accommodations of the centers, you are going to maximize your benefit from the lectures and the majalis that you're going to attend. And inshallah, this is something that will also remain with you after the 10 days or 40 days or however long you're going to be commemorating these majalis. That's the first point. The second point has to do with the topics and the themes that we can address during the month of Muharram. There is no doubt that what we are doing here is commemorating the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and the event of Karbala. It therefore becomes unavoidable for us to spend a little bit of time understanding what actually happened in Karbala. Sometimes people seem to be impatient. They feel like we're spending a little bit too much time on history, too much time on biographies. Sometimes, perhaps things are not presented in the most eloquent or most effective way. True. But usually what we're trying to do is to present the clearest picture possible of what happened in Karbala, which means understanding the actual event. The tragedy of Karbala itself is a few hours in one day. It's half a day. On the 10th of Muharram. That is it. If we want to talk a little bit beyond that, Karbala is a few nights before, the 3rd of Muharram to the 10th of Muharram. That's Karbala. But Karbala can also be, as we believe, Karbala can also be in miniature our entire religion. It's a microcosm of Islam. It's Islam condensed in one event, where Imam Hussein alayhi salam puts everything he has into this one event, to preserve this religion, to pass it on to eternity. It's this or nothing. Is this sacrifice, or there is no truth that remains afterwards? And so Karbala is history and biographies, because we need to understand what happened. We do need to understand the causes that led to Karbala. The causes that started 10 days before, 2 months before, 5 years before, from the time the Holy Prophet passed away, and what happened after Karbala. What were the repercussions? What was the significance of Karbala? Did it work? Was the sacrifice of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam successful or not? In what way was it successful? What else remains? We're still here waiting for an Imam. What worked and what didn't? What did Imam Hussein accomplish? How did the trajectory of history change at the moment of Karbala? What happened in Karbala? We need to study all of this. And so to have a better appreciation, sometimes we have to go into some details to get a clearer picture. If we need to talk about military strategy, so be it. If we need to talk about the geography and the landscape and the climate of Karbala, so be it. So long as it gives us a better, clearer picture of what Imam Hussein alayhi salam was trying to do on that day. What led to it, what we can learn from it, what we can apply from it to the rest of our lives. And if we say that Karbala is a microcosm of everything that we consider to be the truth and to be religion, this means that Karbala is a lot more. It means that when we approach the season of Ashura, we have to expect, and this is what we try to do every year in our lectures, we have to talk beyond. It is not just the event, but what does it tell us about the world? What does it tell us about our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What does it tell us about contemporary things happening in the world today? The relationship between science and faith, spirituality, family relationships, society and politics and culture. All of that is Karbala. And so, what we have done in the past is that we usually take one theme per year and we explore that theme from all of these different angles in a way that allows us to understand that theme by drawing lessons from Karbala, and in a way that, inshallah, can give us practical lessons that we can apply in our lives. And inshallah, this year is not going to be any different, where we try to reconnect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the Holy Prophet, with the Holy Quran, with Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam, with the Imam of our time, by better understanding the tragedy of Karbala and what it can teach us about today's world. How does it help us better understand the world in which we live? The theme for this year, inshallah, is going to be, and this theme, we're not going to come back to it. I'm going to present it today simply to have a backdrop, to set the stage for what we're going to be talking about. So it may seem a little bit out of the blue, but inshallah, the linkages will become clear tonight and in the next nights, inshallah. The theme is going to be the truth industry. Or to be more precise and specifically for tonight, as our introductory lecture, the truth industry and the importance of critical thinking. What do we mean by this? In today's world, there is a very big movement with an enormous amount of resources and money and effort and legislation and policy, redrawing what it means to have access to the truth, and redrawing what it means to say this is truth and this isn't. This is going to be the backdrop against which we want to talk about the topics we want to talk about. The attempt today is that there is what they call a whole of society effort. Every sector and every area and every domain and every citizen in society has to be part of this battle that is being waged against misinformation and disinformation and untruth and fake news and so on and so forth. From every angle, in every area, the aim being nothing less than to eradicate all human error. That's the aim, the claimed aim. How did we get here? And why is this good or bad? Because at first glance, it seems to be something very good. Who wants to be exposed to things that are being presented as truth when they are not? So what's the issue? And how did we get here? And just to be clear, what I'm presenting and what I'm talking about is not going to be things from, as they say, my own pocket. This is a summary of a lot of research from sociologists, from philosophers, from politicians, from investigative journalists that I summarized to you in a few minutes now. In the past, and many of you, I recognize many of the faces, the beautiful faces that we've had over the years, we've talked about the kind of world in which we live. And we said that this world is made up of ideas and principles. There are political foundations, there are economic foundations, there are ideological foundations to this world, and when we put them all together, there's one word that emerges to describe this whole regime we live in Western countries that we simply refer to as the neoliberal order. And we've talked about this in the past. Inshallah, this is just a quick reminder. In today's world, in the West, we live under a neoliberal order. What happened? These researchers tell us that the neoliberal order suffered two major traumatic events in 2016. There's a lot of other stuff that happened in the world, but I'm focusing on two events because those are happening at another scale. They changed the world. That led directly to the truth industry that I'm talking about. Those two events are Brexit and the election of Donald Trump as President of the United States. And the lecture is not about those events in themselves. We're not talking about those events. We're simply describing what happened that led to the truth industry emerging. I think the majority of you understand Donald Trump was one of two candidates nominating himself to become President of the United States, the other being Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton being the favored candidate of the neoliberal order. After the elections, people chose Donald Trump. That's one very simple event. The other one, I think the majority of you also understand it, but I'll explain it in case anyone has not heard about this, you hear about this for the first time. Brexit. What's Brexit? For the longest time in Europe, the countries of Europe have been trying to unite so that all of Europe becomes one entity. It becomes a superpower. If they were actually able to put all of their resources and all of their thinking and aligning their values, all of it together, they would become a superpower at world level. The problem is that their history shows that they are very fragmented. Their entire history is just wars. The entire history of Europe. Full of conflict. Impossible for any two groups to get together and unite. Finally, they were able to create the miracle of the European Union. They got all the countries of Europe to agree to be part of one entity that is now going to become one more superpower, one more pole in the world. They called it the European Union. Right away, as soon as this happens, there are voices that start to emerge from perhaps the biggest part, the most influential player in the European Union, the UK, where people say, we're not sure that this is in our best interest. We're not sure we want to be part of the European Union. Maybe this is not, it's better for us to be separate and alone. Back and forth leads to a referendum where people get to choose themselves whether they want to stay in the European Union or not. At the end, they vote not to stay. So Britain exited the European Union, Brexit. UK leaves in June 2016, they leave the European Union. That happened how many years ago now? Almost 7 years ago. Past 7 years ago now. They are still dealing with and still negotiating and still discussing in agreements what it means for the UK to have left. It's not settled yet. This is how big on world scale this was significant. At the political level, at the economic level, at the cultural level, and so on and so forth. As I said, the point is not to talk about those two events. Why were those events important? The real reason these events are significant is because they were considered to be traumatic blows to the neoliberal order of the world. And what made them 10 times worse, many times worse, is that the neoliberal order had done everything it can to prevent these outcomes. They did everything they can to prevent people from voting to exit in the UK. And they still voted to exit the European Union. The neoliberal order did everything it can to prevent people from voting for Donald Trump. And they still voted for Donald Trump. What does this mean? The conclusion, and there are many, many other smaller events, we're focusing on those two. When they put all of this together, those who hold the power, those who hold the influence of the neoliberal order said, therefore, if all of this happened, these undesirable outcomes happened, it's not because people are simply choosing freely one way or another, one selection or another, one choice or another. That's not what happened. When people can choose freely, they will choose the right thing. But in this case, they chose the wrong thing, which can only mean one thing, which can only mean that they were influenced from the outside. They were influenced by fake news, by misinformation, by disinformation, by untruth. And that's the reason why they were manipulated from the outside into choices that are bad for themselves even though they don't understand them. The normal citizen is too weak to understand by themselves how to make the right choice for themselves. So we must go to work and we must start putting things in place so that these types of catastrophic outcomes never happen again. And this is when the truth industry started to emerge. This is just a couple of years ago. Now there is a fight happening at world level. We must combat, initially it was called hate speech. Hate speech is not elastic enough. It doesn't encompass enough. It's not strong enough when people hear it to be willing to let go of their freedom of expression and to see content being censored and regulated. Hate speech. It had to be something much bigger. So now the defense, the protection is about the truth. We must protect the truth itself. And so the industry emerged. An industry where you now have experts of truth. You have experts in misinformation and disinformation. People who are supposedly, somehow, they have a special access to the absolute truth. And then they get to tell you and I if something is truth or not. Because I can't determine that for myself. I can't be relied upon. I cannot be left to myself to look at information and decide critically whether this is something I accept or reject, something that I want to believe in or not. So I have to wait for the expert, and so we started to see the emergence of experts. We're not sure where they came from. I spent my whole life in university. There is no field, I assure you, in university where you can become an expert in truth. There's no academic expertise in truth. But now we have experts in truth, in information and misinformation and disinformation, who will distinguish it for you. And beyond the people, we now have institutions and organizations in society that are working towards this. And a lot of effort and a lot of money and a lot of power is going behind making sure that all of this is implemented at all levels in society. And this in itself is extremely dangerous. But it gets a lot worse. Because we might think that when we said the neoliberal order, we mean governments. As bad as things can get when governments do things, sometimes governments get things very right and sometimes they get them very wrong, and there's everything in between. But when you live in a democracy, there are checks and balances. There are opposition parties. There are members of parliament that are supposed to represent you. And you don't like them, then you get to present yourself as a candidate for people to elect you. And there's accountability. And you can stop voting for someone if you don't like their policies and their decisions. There are things you can do, and there is accountability, and there is a claim of transparency and openness in the manner in which democracy functions. What happened though, is that all of this was not being put in place by governments. Yes, governments did legislation and regulation and policy, but the billions upon billions of dollars that were injected into this truth industry were not all coming from government. They were coming from specific individuals with very, very deep pockets. People who own Google, LinkedIn, eBay, Open Society, and they are the ones, they are well known in the world. If you do your research, they are entities, whether they are people or foundations or entities, that have very clear, very open ideological leanings. And they're allowed to have them. And they're allowed to invest their money however they want. That's not the issue. The issue is when a person like you and I decides how to regulate society, decides that I'm going to make decisions that will become policy and that will become law and that will become regulation for all to follow. And I will inject money that is going to support my belief system, and everything else becomes untruth and misinformation and disinformation. And as time went by, this started to be taught in schools. So children today are taught at a very young age, as soon as you enter school, they will teach you that there are proper sources of information, there are truths that you will be taught, such as what the school is teaching you, where you can rely on these sources of information. And then when you are exposed to information on the internet, most of it is trolling, and most of it is misinformation, and most of it is disinformation. And be careful, because once you are exposed to it, and if it differs from what we taught you, then you must combat it. You must report it. You must cleanse your mind from it. Otherwise, you're going to be contaminated by it. And this is the language they use. And if you see that others are being contaminated by it, you have to do everything in your power to help them, to get them back to see the right sources of information and the right truths. And so this is how, as we said, it becomes a whole of society endeavor. Everyone working hard together towards achieving and reaching and accessing the truth. And then beyond this, now there are very clear principles. If you do your research, there is something, for instance, called attitudinal inoculation. For those who have studied a bit of medicine, you will recognize the word inoculation. The whole theory behind when you are vaccinated, for instance, or how your immunity works. You're exposed to a weaker form of a toxic substance to your body, and because it's weakened, your body can deal with it for the first time, and it recognizes it, so that the next time when it meets it in its full form, it is able to deal with it. And this is how immunity works. This is the whole principle behind inoculation, except that this is an inoculation of attitudes. It's an attitudinal inoculation. We're going to inoculate you through the algorithms of the platforms, so that you are ready whenever you are faced with certain types of information to recognize that these are misinformation, disinformation, untruth, fake news. And you quickly reject them and report them and help cleanse the world from them. If you do your research again, there are experiments taking place about something called pre-bunking. Pre-bunking is the idea that you use the algorithms, and this is not theory, this is already actually happening. For years it has been happening. Google and TikTok and YouTube and Twitter use pre-bunking. The definition of pre-bunking, if I can find it quickly, the definition of pre-bunking is that it stops citizens from forming specific social and political belief systems. We expose you to certain information, and we prevent you from seeing certain types of information, so that we shape your belief system. And then you no longer tolerate any other type of beliefs, any other ideas, any other values, any other beliefs. And the experiments have happened, if you do your research, in the US, in Germany, in Poland, in the Czech Republic, in Slovakia, and India was scheduled next, but I don't have dates. And if you understand what India means, in a couple of decades in the world, India will be the top country in the world in population. It will exceed China. This is where the world is at when it comes to the truth. Today you see headings in articles that says, this is in the US, and these are journalists, politicians, thinkers who write this, headings where you see free speech is a threat to democracy. And in another article, censorship is necessary to protect democracy. A few years ago, this would have been ridiculous to even imagine. Today, this is reality. As I said, this is the backdrop. This is a world in which the truth now has an industry behind it, with experts, with institutions, with billions of dollars being injected. And we might think that this is absolutely revolutionary. It is and it isn't. This is how humanity functions. Those who hold the power and those who want to hold the power in the world, they've known this forever. You want to control people, you control what they think. And the Quran talks about this. If there are universal truths that apply to the world, the Quran has talked about it. We just need to learn how to read it. In the story of Musa alayhi salam, as one example, we have a story. Prophet Musa comes to Fir'aun, he presents his truth, he talks about God, he presents his miracles. Fir'aun turns to whom? The Quran uses a term, we've talked about it in the past. Turns to the mala'. The Quran says, وَقَالَ فِرْعَوْنُ يَا أَيُّهَا الْمَلَأ. Who are the mala'? The Quran always talks about the mala'. The mala' are the elites of society. In every society there are those who are much wealthier and much more influential, and they hold positions of power, and the Quran holds them accountable much more than others because they influence. They can guide or misguide a society. Fir'aun turns to the notable ones after Musa alayhi salam presents his truth, and he tells them, وَقَالَ فِرْعَوْنُ يَا أَيُّهَا الْمَلَأ مَا عَلِمْتُ لَكُم مِّنْ إِلَٰهٍ غَيْرِي. He tells them, O noble ones, O notables, O elites, I do not know any other gods for you than myself. What's the criterion of Fir'aun for truth? Is the criterion, let's go look and investigate whether Musa is saying right or wrong? How do I know the truth according to Fir'aun? To live under Fir'aun's regime, how do I know the truth? How do I know if his claim is true or not? Do I investigate? Can I think for myself? Can I be critical? No. I have to go back to Fir'aun, and Fir'aun tells me, مَا عَلِمْتُ لَكُم مِّنْ إِلَٰهٍ غَيْرِي. I do not know of any other gods for you than myself. Therefore, that is your truth. I have decided what the truth is. This is the world towards which we are headed. You have to decide for yourselves. Do you agree? Do you accept that the truth, your truth, is being decided for you by others? Or do you want to keep your critical mind? And you want to keep your freedom of thought? Which means that you have to equip yourself. And you have to be aware that this is happening around you. And we're not saying that the world is for you to be able to tell apart through all the ambiguity and the noise and the messiness that this is truth and this is not. This is not a straightforward exercise. However, and we have talked about this a lot, Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam have given us a guarantee. There is a reason why Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, they've engineered this religion of ours, so that if you are a follower of Ahlul Bayt, the manner in which you enter through this religion is through Imam al-Hussein. And every opportunity that you have, every act of remembrance, every religious ceremony, go back to Mafatih al-Janan, every Eid, every happy event, every sad event, there is a ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein. Why? The event has nothing to do with Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. It's a Eid. We're in Mecca and we're celebrating. We finished the pilgrimage. We finished the fasting of the month of Ramadan. What's the point of remembering Imam al-Hussein now? Every event you have in the year, the month of Rajab, the month of Sha'ban, you go back to all the events throughout the year, there is a ziyarah, a specific ziyarah. It's not even the same ziyarah. Ahl al-Bayt made the effort to have specific ziyarat for each one of these events so that you go back to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And Ahl al-Bayt talk about this. Imam Ahl al-Bayt alayhim salam, when they are asked why, some other companions asked them, why do you insist so much that we perform the ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein? And the Imams tell them, are you not all ships of rescue? The companion says. Why don't we hold on to any of you? Let's enter religion through any of you. And the Imam says, we are all ships of rescue. But the ship of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is larger, is more encompassing, much easier to get on for all of us sinners, and much faster. Brings you back to God much faster. The relationship with God is much more direct. This is the engineering of Ahl al-Bayt. This is not our own genius that we come up with this. This is the importance of coming back to these majalis of Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam, especially in this time when we live in this world where the truth is being so lost. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, when he talks about Imam al-Hussein, some people say Imam al-Hussein rose for political reasons, or Imam al-Hussein rose for humanitarian reasons. Imam al-Hussein rose for social justice. All of it is true. But to encompass it all in one term, what does Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam say? Why did Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam rise? What's in summary his whole movement? He says, لِيَسْتَنْقِذَ عِبَادَكَ مِنَ الْجَهَالَةِ وَحِيرَةِ الضَّلَالَةِ in the ziyarat, in multiple ziyarat. He says, so that he may rescue the servants from ignorance, from jahala, opposite of truth. وَحِيرَةِ الضَّلَالَةِ and the confusion of misguidance, of being lost, of not knowing where the truth is. You're lost in the world, you're looking for the truth, go back to Karbala. Intellectually and rationally, go back to Karbala. It will tell you what your values are. It will tell you what your beliefs are. It will tell you what your identity is. Who are you in this world? Karbala will remind you. And this is the rational component. And Ahl al-Bayt also present another type of truth that you will not find in the world. In today's world, it's nowhere. You have to go back to God for this second type of truth. The Quran, Ahl al-Bayt tell us, Imam al-Sajjad says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given every human being 4 eyes, 2 sets of eyes, he says. He says 1 set of eyes to see the affairs of his world, and 1 set of eyes in his heart to recognize the truth and guidance. And the problem for all of us is not that we don't have the second set of eyes, is that our attachment to this world, our sinking in sins, makes those eyes unable to see the truth. We lose the ability and the guidance to recognize the truth. So we need a cleansing, a spiritual cleansing. How do we do that? We do that through Karbala. We do that through the emotional attachment, not only the rational and intellectual one, which we already covered. That one is there and it's important. No, attach yourself to the Imam emotionally, with raw emotions, with tears. Cleanse the eyes of the heart so that you can see truth and guidance yourself directly. In the famous narration, Di'bil says, I entered to see Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, and I found him sitting in a state of sorrow and mourning and depression. Di'bil al-Khuza'i was the greatest poet of his time. I don't have time to read the entire narration. He says, I entered to see Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, and I found him sad. And then the Imam starts to tell Di'bil al-Khuza'i, he tells him, first of all, he greets him. He welcomes him. He sits him right beside him and he starts to tell him, if someone cries over Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, or makes another person cry for Imam al-Hussein, even if it is a single tear that is shed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive all of their sins. The Imam uses the term al-batta, entirely. This is the importance of the emotional attachment. And then Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, Di'bil says, Imam al-Rida got up himself, where he's surrounded by his companions, the narration says. He got up and he put a barrier, a curtain, he said, so that the woman of his family can come and sit behind the curtain. And then he asked Di'bil to recite his verses of poetry so that the woman may be there, and he is there with his companions, all of them weeping over Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam for the verses of poetry that Di'bil was reciting. And there are many lessons for us in this. Each and every one of us can become a Di'bil. Di'bil was praised by Ahl al-Bayt and Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. He greeted him. He got up for him. He gave him presents. Why? Di'bil was a poet. He was the most amazing poet of his time. He dedicated his poetry to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and to Ahl al-Bayt. The Imam called him our supporter. By his tongue, so long as you live, use your tongue to support us. The same call to us applies. Our Imams are saying, support us. We're not poets. Not all of us are poets. But we have something that we can support Ahl al-Bayt with. All of us can be creative, and all of us have passions, and all of us have talents that we can use to dedicate to Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam and become Di'bils in our own way. Let's not waste these opportunities, and inshallah this becomes the attitude, the general position through which we enter these holy nights of Karbala, these holy nights of Ashura, for the next few nights that we are together. Inshallah, we enter them with these broken hearts, looking for the truth, and ways to find the truth everywhere we look for it, without being told from others what that truth may be. Assalamu ala al-Husayn, wa ala Ali ibn al-Husayn, wa ala awlad al-Husayn, wa ala ashab al-Husayn, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi al-tayyibin al-tahirin.